Alright everyone, it's time for Vermont Issues episode 66. Second homeowners in the state of Vermont can apparently vote in Vermont elections. This article, I was not aware of this, but there was a local election in which a family from Connecticut, they had a second home in Vermont. They had signed up to vote and voted. Apparently there is no specific piece of legislation in our state preventing this from happening. So what can occur is that if you have a second home in the state of Vermont, you can sign up and say, yo, I'm voting in this Vermont election. All you have to do is basically state, yeah, I intend to move to Vermont at some point in the future, or this is my primary, I consider this to be my primary residence, and the determination of that is left up to the individual who is actually signing up. So then they can go vote, they go back home, they can vote there too, depending on the rules that they would have within the state. And because there's no cross-checking, we presumably have voter fraud in the state of Vermont. I would say that this is a clear-cut case of fraud because apparently this is the allegation. The candidate themselves encouraged them to do this, encouraged them to sign up and vote in the Vermont election despite knowing that these are second homeowners within the state. Now, there are quite a few second homes within Vermont. We're kind of infamous at this point. People from more urban areas, they typically, if they come here, if they're not just a tourist, that is, they're not just coming to ski for a week or look at the leaves or something, you know, there are a lot of extra people on the roads right now. You see license plates from all over the U.S. At this time of year because we're getting near peak foliage. Over the next couple of weeks, it's insane, dies down for a little while, the snow comes. Once the mountains are ready to be skied on, then it gets insane again, then it kind of goes away. Midsummer, you get some of that also up in Burlington, weed tourism, things of that manner. Again, something we're famous for. But these people were told by the candidate, oh, you can just sign up and vote here. And the election, this particular local election, was extremely close and low vote anyway, because we've got a lot of rural communities. So if you get a rural community in which people are evenly split enough so that there are less than 4 votes that will decide the election, you can actually end up with some public official who only got into office because of the will of people who aren't even from this state. They are not Vermonters. They are second home owners. And there are a hell of a lot of them in the state of Vermont. People from the New York, New Jersey, down to Maryland sort of region. A lot of these wealthier individuals have, you know, they have a cabin or a cottage out in the woods somewhere, or they have a townhome or a condo or something like that. A lot of them. We're talking about tens of thousands of people within the state. Within a state population of under 1 million people, it's not a negligible proportion in some communities of the vote. Now, in some communities, it's more than others. If you go over to Quechee, parts of Bridgewater, if you go over to the Woodstock side of Vermont, that's where you get a shit ton of the second homes. And then you go up to the Northeast Kingdom, there's some. Here in Rutland, not so many. In the Killington region, yes. Here in Rutland proper, not so many. Could this not be a problem in future elections, especially now that I guess the cat's out of the bag and people know that they can do this? Like, what reason would they have not to sign up? And if it's not a form of fraud, shouldn't the state of Vermont, the article makes this clear, I happen to concur, if this is indeed perfectly acceptable to the officials within this state, if it is not considered a problem, if it's not considered fraud, if it's not considered an issue, why not tell all these people, hey, you own a second home here, you can vote in the Vermont election. Just tell them, hey, yeah, I intend to move here at some point. Then after the election, of course, you change your mind, you go back to your regular state, you sign back up there, and you say, oh, no, I'm not moving to Vermont. No, I changed my mind. I've done this several times. Doesn't anybody see a fucking problem with such a practice? Shouldn't there be some sort of determinant used within the state of who does and does not qualify as a voting-capable resident within the state of Vermont? I would think that if somebody has homes in multiple states, they should only be privy to calling themselves a fully functioning resident of one of those states. And that's the way that it's supposed to be. Unfortunately, Vermont does not have specific things in place to make sure that that's actually respected. Well, yeah, that's a little bit of a problem. That could lead to some fraud, at least in local and state elections. I would think that would be a massive problem. And remember, in the state of Vermont, you do not require any sort of ID to vote. So up here, our voter fraud apparently is that rich people from the urban sort of New York, New Jersey area can determine a local election just by buying a cabin somewhere out on a couple acres on some hillside somewhere. And people are so worried. I have a little bit of a problem with sort of the second homer class within the state. You know, if they've moved here permanently, like they're a retiree, that's one thing. But people who are like, they're urban elite and they have their cabin or whatever, and they pretend that they're roughing it even though they've got, you know, power and water and everything else under the sun. They go down to the valleys to shop. They also scarify the landscape of our hillsides and our mountaintops, buying their vanity homes. And yet people within the state are still locked in like this death struggle over where the windmills are going to go. Oh, it's going to look terrible. Yes, I would rather look at a few windmills on the hillside than somebody's fucking vanity home that they spent $2-3 million on in order to come and apparently vote in elections that they technically are not legally entitled to vote in. I'll just put that out there. I think the windmills are more useful. By the way, one thing I've thought of, this is only vaguely connected to this idea. Why does the state not lower the property tax rate on people's primary residences and then tax the second homes more? These people often are millionaires and multimillionaires. Up their tax rate by 1%, drop everybody else's so people within the state can catch a break. If people want to be able to own their second home here, shouldn't, or second homes in general, someone within Vermont is rich, their primary residence, why even bother taxing it? We should be able to own our property, not rent it from the government. Make it so that second homes or businesses or whatever are taxed more. Why don't we shift the burden to people who have done very well in that more indirect sense? That way people aren't, so that way everyone gets a little slice of the pie. You've got your home, no property tax for you. You own the home. You're not renting the home from some fucking state entity. I think that'd be a good idea. That way these people, maybe they'll make their primary residence in Vermont actually come here when they retire, have one home. It doesn't matter if it's elaborate and they've got, 20 bedrooms or if it's a little cottage. It doesn't matter. Oh, my goodness. How far the state has fallen when we don't even require that a person actually be a resident of the state in order to vote in it. I think it's a sad reflection on people like to take advantage of Vermont. We're like Hobbiton or something, and so we don't have a lot of that legalese, but then we get screwed in the ass because we don't. It's terrible. That's about all. Peace out.